Welcome to A Time for Change. I'm Kristen Myers here with Sabine Marcellus. Now, for the next half hour, we are going to be shifting our attention from current day Wall Street to what was once known as Black Wall Street. That's the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, that in the early 1900s was one of the most affluent Black communities in the United States. Listen to this. It had 35 square blocks of homes, churches, restaurants, movie theaters, nightclubs, and shops.
But 100 years ago, all of that was destroyed as an angry white mob burnt the neighborhood to the ground in what is known as the Tulsa Race Massacre. As many as 300 people were killed, with businesses lost forever and thousands left homeless. President Biden is in Tulsa this afternoon to commemorate the massacre and to announce federal initiatives aimed at reducing racial disparities. We are joined now by the great-granddaughter of one of the survivors of the massacre, Anneliese Bruner. Anneliese, did you think you'd live to see the day where a U.S. president would not only acknowledge the massacre, but actually go to Tulsa to pay his respects?
I'm so glad to be with you and to speak to you about my feelings as a descendant of two survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre, my great-grandmother and her daughter, my grandmother, who was a small child of 7 at the time. I am pleased to be here when President Biden arrives here in Tulsa to deliver remarks and to say that without equivocation, the federal government of my very own country realizes and recognizes the importance of this event and of using this as a launching pad to talk about closing the racial wealth gap and to move toward a more perfect union of equity in opportunity. I'm very pleased.
Now, Anneliese, I'm hoping we can take a step back for just a moment before looking out ahead. I'm curious to know if you can tell us, exactly how the Tulsa Massacre impacted your family, financially even. We were just highlighting, how many businesses and shops were destroyed. So much Black wealth that had been created was completely wiped out in the span of 24 hours. How did that impact your family to this day?
Well, the picture you see there is my great-grandmother, Mary Elizabeth Jones Parrish, who had her own independent school there. At the time, in the 1920s, women were entering the workforce, many of them as secretaries. And so she had a day job and an evening job. Her day job was teaching secretarial skills at the local YMCA, the Bunton branch, for Black Americans. She operated also her own independent secretarial school where she taught typewriting, shorthand, and other kinds of skills that would enable women to enter the workforce and become part of the productive economy. Her business was doing well. It is one of the businesses that was destroyed in the conflagration. She had 2 apartments, one where she lived, the other where she conducted her business. And she and her daughter, my grandmother, had to flee. And when they returned, everything was in ashes. Subsequent to that, my grandmother, who remained in Tulsa throughout young adulthood, fled. I call it fleeing because ultimately that's what it is when you decide that you've got to leave your home and start over anew somewhere else. She went to San Francisco, where I was born and raised, because that's where my father was, her son. And let me tell you, it was a different life for her there. My grandmother, Florence Mary, the young child in the photo you see, was a graduate of Langston University. She was a teacher. But when she arrived in San Francisco, those opportunities were not available to her. The San Francisco Unified School District did in fact hire her. But although she scored very high on the examination to become a teacher, discrimination prevented her from taking up or I say resuming her career there. And she became a janitor for the San Francisco Unified School District. Imagine how that fall in stature and in pay impacts one's personal sense of worth and accomplishment. It was something that was devastating for her. She tried to file suit, but things did not work out into her advantage. And so, yes, we were permanently impacted in kind of a cascading way from the events of the Tulsa Race Massacre throughout the history of my family. And so almost like reinventing the wheel every generation, we had to start from scratch. She started from scratch in California. My father started from scratch in California. I started from scratch in California. And we can draw a direct line back through the financial consequences to people of this terrible loss.
And Anneliese, you talk about starting from scratch and the terrible loss and the undoubted pain that your family had to endure. Was anybody ever prosecuted for the Tulsa Race Massacre? And did the Tulsa government or the private sector ever offer your family any kind of financial compensation?
Neither my family nor any other family has ever seen justice. We've not seen people brought to the bar of justice in the prosecutorial sense, but at the same time, neither has any recompense in the financial sense ever been made. This is what Mother Viola Fletcher asked for when she came before Congress a couple of weeks ago and entered her testimony into the congressional record. She sought restoration, repair, and that has not happened.
Anneliese, I'm very glad that you mentioned Viola Fletcher, because we do actually have some sound from her testimony. Let's take a listen.
I will never forget the violence of the white mob when we left our home. I still see black men being shot, black bodies lying in the street. I still smell smoke and see fire. I still see black businesses being burned. Our country may forget this history, but I cannot.
So speaking on that point of, reparations, essentially, financial compensation for everything that your family went through, that Viola and her family went through, what are you asking from either the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma, or even from the federal government? Is it just reparations in the form of a lump sum, to you, to your family, to frankly many black families around the country? What is it specifically that would help make you guys whole?
Let me tell you, as an African American within this country, I have never received from anyone an apology for things that have been imposed upon our communities and what we have endured. It was someone of Dutch descent, a friend of mine, who apologized to me, if you can believe this, just out of the blue one time for the Dutch role in slavery. Now, if people who have no present day interest in what has become of Black America can say something like that to me, it does puzzle me that my own country people, my compatriots, if you will, have never mustered the courage to be able to say something like that. That was something that was a revelation in my own personal life. And it started me to thinking, what would I like from my government and from my country people, my compatriots, people with whom I share equal citizenship and, in the grander sense, an equal history, although from different sides. An apology would go very far. That's number one, but that just opens the door. Number two, yes, I do absolutely believe in cash reparations. But more important at this moment in time, when we look at these elderly people, Mother Fletcher, Mother Randall, Father Ellis, they are in the, one doesn't want to say, but certainly if demographics prove correct, lifespans being what they are, these are the people, the survivors themselves, who still are among us, who deserve the most immediate and urgent consideration in terms of getting them a cash payment to ensure that their final days are spent in dignity and the security that was wrested from them 100 years ago. That's what I would talk about if I were to be listened to about what reparations, how they should begin.
And we'll definitely be continuing that conversation. Anneliese Bruner, great-granddaughter of a Tulsa Race Massacre survivor, also an author. The Nation Must Awake. You can see that book there. Thank you so much for joining us today.